Well, hey, we've found ourselves under this GSX today to talk about the table height adjustment. There's more that goes into the table height adjustment than actually adjusting the table, and of course everything is covered in great length in your book. But that being said, I wanted to first show you something about table levelness first. Before the table height adjustment, you need to make sure your table is level. If you are new to a GS machine, when you look down at the table, you're going to see these bolts on each side. And you're going to think to yourself, well, this is obviously how to adjust your table up and down. But these bolts are actually only to do with table levelness and nothing to do with height adjustment. If you're in a brand new GS house, most likely they'll be set from the factory and be okay. But if you're taking over an older place, most likely somebody before you has thought this is how you move the table and has cranked them around. So please refer to your table levelment adjustment in your book to start this out. And let's get your table perfectly level. The height does not matter. Just get it level first, and then we can move forward with the adjustment. Alright, to do the table measurement, the next thing you need to remember about the GS machine is the GS machine, all measurements are taken in metric. And so in the process of determining how to adjust the table, we need to determine what is the current table height at the top and what is the current table height at the bottom. On the machine for the top adjustment, you measure off of this bar to the top there, and the measurement should be 140 plus or minus 2 millimeters. You can see by this one, we're at about 138, so I think we're maybe 137, so we're maybe just slightly off, but we're right in the zone. Alright, now that we went down into the table and we got the measurement for the table height for the very top, we need to get the measurement for the bottom. To do that, we have to make sure that the table is at the full bottom of its stroke. The way to tell that where the table position is to get it to the full bottom. This chain and your crank have to be perfectly bisecting each other. And when they're perfectly bisecting, that shows the bottom. So to do that, turn your machine off at the bottom of its... Come over to your table motor and just use your table motor to manipulate the chain and the crank to be perfectly bisecting, and that will show that your table is all the way at its lowest position. Now that up above we have confirmed that the chain is bisecting the crank, we know our table is at the very bottom of its stroke. When the table is at the very bottom of the stroke, we can measure the bottom position, and that will tell us what we need to do for our table measurement. To measure the bottom position, what you're measuring is you're measuring from the pin deck to the bottom of the table itself. The measurement should be between 10 to 15 millimeters. If you're working on the older machines, it was 10 millimeters plus or minus 2, but we now are 10 to 15 millimeters from the bottom. The Brunswick measurement tool works really great for this because you can get that small piece of metal in there and feel exactly where it is. A lot of times if I don't have that with me, it's hard to read the tape measure. I'll even just take a 10 millimeter Allen key because we know it's 10 millimeters and make sure I have my clearance there. Now that we have verified our top measurement, which shows the 140 plus or minus 2, and we've checked our bottom measurement, which is 10 to 15 millimeters, pin deck to the bottom of the table, we can refer to this chart here that tells us what we actually need to do for our measurement. So this chart says to adjust the position at the distributor only, so your top, to do the bottom one, to take them both in the same direction, or move the table in opposite directions, top to bottom. This machine we determined is perfect at the bottom at 15 millimeters, but at 137 was a little bit low, a little bit high at the top. So what we need to do is we need to adjust the position at the distributor only, and because it was 137 and we wanted it at 140, we need to lower the table only. So we'll just follow our guide and we'll see that we need to shorten the crank and lengthen the chain equally. Now, just because my machine needed only the top measurement adjusted, your machine may be different. So please use the chart to make sure you're doing it correctly for what your machine needs. Alright, so to make a adjustment on your crank arm or the chain itself, which is done with the bearing, the first thing is we have to get the table supported so all the weight is off the chain. In order to do this, we want to make sure we have 10 pins on the table, on the pin deck, standing up, and then we want to stop our machine on top of the stroke limiter, so the machine is stopped. And the last thing is to make sure you put your jack stands underneath the table, so no matter what, your table cannot fall and this chain cannot come back to bite you. So once again, like we determined, we're just going to just adjust the highest position only. And once again, looking at our chart, we're going to see that we need to lower the table. And to do that, we're going to need to shorten the crank, and we're going to need to lengthen the chain equally. So, to lengthen the chain, like I showed you up above, we use the bearing, which is this piece right here. So what you need to do is, using this piece, you need to determine what hole you're in. So for example, if you're in hole number 1, if you move it to hole number 1, there would be no change. If you moved it to hole number 2, it would shorten it by 2 millimeters. Number 3 would shorten it by 4.9. 4 would be shortening it by 7.5, and on down the line. If you were over here, and if your current hole was hole number 4, for example, if we moved it to number 1, it would lengthen the chain by 7.5. Or hole number 2 would lengthen it on down. This machine that we're working on currently, it is in hole number 3, which is the factory default. We determined it was 137, and we want to put this to 140, which is 3 millimeters. So if I look at number 3 and I go down, I can see if I put it in number 1, I'm going to lengthen it 4.9. But if I put it in number 2, that will lengthen it 2.9 millimeters, which is the 3 millimeters I need. So I need to move this one to hole number 2. Alright, so remember by our guide that we need to both shorten the crank and lengthen the chain equally. We determined that if we go from hole 3 to hole 2, we're going to get 2.9 millimeters on our crank, or on our chain, and so we need to shorten our crank the same way. So the first thing you want to do is you want to come through and you want to take and mark where your crank arm is. Now, before I make my adjustments, one more time, our table is down, it's on the stroke limiter. There are 10 pins on the table, and there are jack stands under the table, so you can see we are totally free and safe. To make the adjustment and to shorten it, all we got to do is come through, loosen our two 19mm bolts on the side, and we just need to tap this down 3 millimeters. Of course, this is a wrench and not a hammer. After we tap, we can use our tape measure to measure our line. I know you're not going to be able to see the line on the camera. Perfect. So now we've taken this down 3 millimeters to shorten it. Alright, the next step is to move the hole on the bearing. The first thing is, once we free this chain, if we were just to let the chain go, the chain would go all the way down inside your tower arm, and then you'd have to be fishing it out, which is nobody wants to do that. So the first thing I always do is I just randomly just take any kind of a screwdriver, put it in. That way, if I lose the chain in my hand, it's not going to fall down into the table guide tube. First thing we want to do is now we want to pop. This is our master link right here. We're going to take our end of it off. I already pre-popped it right before the video started. We have our outside piece. And now we are free. Sometimes you can do this all in place. Sometimes you're going to pull it off. Since it's a video, we're going to pull it all off anyway. Now we're free. So all we're going to do is we're going to take it from right here, and we determine that hole number 2, so this is hole 3, this is hole 1. We determine that hole number 2 is where we need to be at. So all we're going to do is take the assembly off, pull it out there, put it in hole number 2, I'm going to pop it on, and we'll just put it all back together the way I took it apart. Alright, now that we have all of this all reassembled, the main thing we want to do is make sure we take our safety screwdriver out of place, and we're ready to check our heights. Alright, you can see that we have cycled this machine, got it back all the way up to the top in the home position. I come back under here with the tape measure, we can see we're sitting right at 140 millimeters. So this table should be perfectly set top and bottom.